Can radial blur create realistic motion blur for artists? Have you ever wondered if radial blur can truly mimic the look of motion blur in your artwork? Let's break it down and see how this technique can be a game changer for artists. Radial blur is a special effect that can create a convincing sense of motion, especially when it involves rotation or zooming around a central point. This makes it ideal for simulating circular or spinning motion in digital art and illustrations. When you apply radial blur, it produces a blur that radiates outward or inward from a defined center. This mimics how objects appear when they rotate or move toward or away from the viewer. In the world of digital painting, radial blur shines in dynamic scenes. Think about spinning wheels, swirling objects, or zoom effects that suggest rapid movement. Artists can control the center of the blur, its direction, and the smoothness or hardness of the blur edges. This level of control allows for tailored effects that can really enhance the storytelling and visual impact of your work. However, it is important to note that radial blur has its limitations. It is not the best choice for replicating linear motion blur, which happens when objects move quickly in a straight line. For those situations, directional or linear motion blur tools are more suitable. Radial blur creates a circular distortion rather than a straight streak, which can be less effective for linear movements. From the perspective of advanced digital painting techniques and special effects blending, radial blur is a useful tool for adding specific types of motion blur effects. When you combine it with an understanding of depth and focal points in your artwork, it can help create a sense of depth and speed that feels realistic within the context of the scene. In practical terms, artists often use radial blur to simulate spinning or rotating objects. It can also create zoom burst effects that draw attention to a focal point. This technique adds dramatic emphasis on movement that involves circular paths. To achieve the most realistic results, artists should carefully position the blur center and adjust the blur intensity based on the perceived speed and distance of the moving object. This control helps maintain the illusion of depth and motion consistent with real-world physics. In summary, radial blur can create realistic motion blur effects for rotational or zooming movements in digital art. However, it is not suited for linear motion blur. Understanding the type of motion you want to depict is key to choosing the right blur technique to enhance the realism and dynamism of your illustrations.